Tonight on Primetime Politics.
We're going to stay focused on delivering these things.
The Prime Minister defending the plan to give Canadians GST relief and a $250 check. Our Friday journalist panel weighs in on that and the ongoing gridlock in Parliament. Also, some small businesses are raising alarms about the impact of that looming tax holiday. We hear why from Dan Kelly of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business.
The development of new and disruptive technologies are rapidly redefining conflict and what it takes to be safe and secure.
And we're at day one of the annual Halifax International Security Forum, where protecting democracies around the world is on the agenda. Michael Serapio sits down with global politics expert Janice Stein. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Andrew Thompson with you tonight. Michael Serapio is on assignment in Halifax, and you'll hear from him coming up. We begin with more on the federal plan for a GST holiday and for a $250 payment to nearly 19 million Canadians. The Prime Minister is defending the moves today. That includes a question about some provinces worried they'll have a shortfall in tax revenue.
I think every provincial government across the country understands how important it is to be there for Canadians who are facing real pressures around the cost of living. That's what we're doing. That's why we're stepping up to support Canadians, and I'm expecting provinces who see the challenges that their citizens are facing to realize that this is a way they can be there for people as they face the challenges of the next few months.
The province of Ontario is already planning a $200 rebate next year, and the Premier says he's happy with any government that wants to put more money in people's pockets. Here's Doug Ford reacting to the federal move.
I'm glad they took our lead on that. I think more governments should do that. Rather than gouge the taxpayers.
All right, let's talk about the GST holiday and the $250 check and more with our Friday panel of journalists covering Parliament Hill. We have Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joel-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. So we have the Prime Minister today, again, defending this new plan for a GST holiday and for these $250 checks, saying we're not backing down when it comes to supporting Canadians. On the other hand, we have other parties calling it a vote-buying scheme. We have it being called a temporary tax trick. So, Tonda, let me start with you. When we add it all up, what do you think the political impact is going to be beyond the actual financial impact for Canadians?
I mean, I think that remains to be seen. It may be too far out from an election to actually have an impact. Will it be visible to Canadians? Does it make that much of a difference for many who are most in need? I don't know. But I think it's many things politically. It's an attempt to steal the NDP's thunder and the Conservatives, who have in the past proposed just such a holiday on GST. It's an attempt to show Canadians that they care about cost of living issues, and whether or not they manage to stick handle it through right now. In any event, it's still going to be something that they can poke their opponents with. You know, it frames them as the fighters for Canadians whenever a vote comes. But again, I don't know that that will hold. And I think, though, it also tells us a little bit. Well, something interesting I found is that this is not as progressive a measure as this government has contended to be in the past, nor for the NDP, actually. The fact that the NDP and the Liberals are now sort of all in on taxes, you know, kind of unlike the way they've been portrayed in the past, as a way to spread money largesse all around and not either make it a measure that's means tested or helping the most poor among us, and taking a big chunk of change, $6 billion, that could go into any of the cares, you know, pharmacare, healthcare, dental care, child care, long-term care, these things, these big programs that those two parties, progressive parties, stood for. That tells me that they're moving off, and they are sort of positioning themselves kind of out-populisting the Conservatives, who are a populist party.
Right. And we've heard others comments saying, look, this money could go to defense, it could go to economic growth, productivity.
It could go to many things.
JD, how do you see how this announcement got rolled out?
Well, it looks like an economic statement, an economic update from the Prime Minister and all that, because it's got fiscal measures that are very important, that will cost a lot of money to the federal treasury. And we still don't have numbers about the actual deficit of last year, the final numbers, and the projected deficit of next year. So this, it looks good now, but I think it may cause some problems later because, as you know, as you mentioned, we've got difficult choices to make in the future in terms of defense spending, border security, making sure that we are in sync with what Washington will want us to do so that we are still, considered a solid ally. And so it may limit the choices we make in the future because $6 billion in what? 2 to 3 months? That's a lot of money.
2 months.
Yeah, and we're hearing criticism today from another American member of Congress about Canada and its spending and its NATO contributions. So, Bob, let me turn to you on this because I want to talk about how this goes against the Conservative message on taxes, on the cost of living. Do you think it's going to be an effective move for the Liberals to try and bridge some of that gap they're facing when it comes to affordability?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, this is a very expensive gimmick by a government in an electoral deficit that doesn't give a hoot about the fiscal deficit. Because when you had the Conservatives, when they brought in the promise to take the GST off of new homes, they actually said it was going to cost $8 billion, and here's where we're going to make up the money. And they haven't done this with this at all. And I also think it's an extremely unfair gimmick that they put forward. The $250 that we can get in the spring, a family making $300,000 can get that money. That's not, to me, right. Shouldn't this be going to people who are suffering the most with high inflation? The same thing with the GST. And we have a really effective GST rebate program for low-income families. They get quarterly payments to help them offset the cost of the GST and food and clothing and issues like that. Why wouldn't that be targeted to those people? Because they are really the people who are in need, not people who are making $150,000 or more a year. So that's why it's all electoral motivated. They don't really care about poor people. Clearly, with this kind of a measure that they're putting forward, they're looking at a larger voting bloc. And I don't even know if that's going to work because, people may be so fed up with Trudeau, they'll say, give me the money, but I'm still not voting for you.
Well, the timing is interesting, Tonda. 23 days, I think, between this announcement and when the GST holiday would start to get a bill through. So it is interesting how everything is really compressed. A 2-month holiday, this bill has to get through Parliament. And we are, of course, in that dispute, the Conservatives, the ongoing privilege debate and parliamentary business, at least government business, at a standstill.
Well, at the time we're having this conversation right now, we don't know exactly what procedural plan is in place to move this through the House or to break the bigger logjam. The NDP would have us believe that there's a way to suspend the logjam while they support this measure alone. The Liberals, of course, want the logjam broken, and they want to be able to bring in their fiscal economic statement, and they want to be able to table the votes, put the votes before Parliament to move money along to pay for some $21 billion in other programming that they need money for. And I don't see yet how that logjam gets broken. But yeah, they're coming down to a crunch. But right now, they're all holding their cards pretty close to their vest.
There's also some regional inequality in this measure because if the taxes is harmonized, the consumption taxes is harmonized, you get 13 or 14%. If it's not harmonized, like in Quebec, you get only 5% the GST. And the Minister of Finance of Quebec introduced an economic statement yesterday. It was, upswing by the federal announcement, and he said this was a gimmick. He said, unless Ottawa compensates us to offer the same thing, we won't do it. So it's going to be, I think, the source of many controversy to come.
Okay, I want to stay on the issue of Parliament here because we did hear the House Speaker yesterday kind of weigh in on the standoff that's going on, the fact that government business isn't getting through, and the fact that there is government spending, the supplementary estimates that need to be voted on dealt with by December 10th, and he's essentially nudging the parties to find a way out of this impasse. Bob, do you think there is a way out of the impasse at this point before Christmas where there's going to be some kind of resolution to what has really become just a complete blocking?
Yeah, and let's just remember what this filibuster is all about. It's the government refusing to provide over all the documents about a green slush fund that could mean tens of millions of dollars of money that may have gone to people that shouldn't have got that money. And Parliament wants that the government to provide those documents unredacted, and they won't do so. The Speaker, I was wondering, and I don't know enough about parliamentary procedure, so I was wondering if the Speaker was signaling that he may try to do something to end the impasse himself, which would be explosive because he's already lost control of the House of Commons. I mean, nobody respects this guy. He's the worst speaker I've seen since John Bosley back in 1986 when Mulroney was around. They had to end up getting rid of him because he wasn't able to have respect or control the House. So I don't know what's going to happen here. I mean, none of us do because we don't know whether the NDP will change their mind or not change their mind. That looks like the only solution unless the Speaker can somehow intervene. And again, I don't know enough about parliamentary procedure to know whether he can do it.
Okay, well, one thing we do know is that we are down a minister in the federal cabinet, Randy Boissonnault, stepping away this week, saying he's going to work to clear the allegations against him. Tonda, how does that departure affect the possibility of what we're thinking in terms of a cabinet shuffle?
Well, it just piles on the reasons for a cabinet shuffle, doesn't it? But I'm told it's not imminent. No. So maybe do they want to sort of give a little bit of breathing room in between now and inauguration? We thought it was going to happen after the U.S. election, but Trump is rolling out his nominees. I don't think it matters that much, you know, in terms of who. None of these people have direct relationships and contacts with any of the people Trump is naming. So I guess the reasons for the cabinet shuffle are obvious. We have 4 ministers not running again. We have 2 who have left since, and 2 other ministers who are doubled up, doing double duty with big portfolios. Transport and Treasury Board for Anita Anand is huge, and Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor has Veterans Affairs, now Employment, and Official Languages. So huge files. They have to be spread out, and I would imagine that there's a lot in the Liberal caucus who'd like it sooner than later. But guess what? If he does a cabinet shuffle and picks some of the people who might otherwise criticize him, he lights a fire under those who don't get the job, right? And so expect more criticism to become more vocal about the Prime Minister's ability to stay on.
And one more reason to have a cabinet shuffle is that Alberta, which is a key province in this federation, has no voice now in Canada with the departure of Randy Boissonnault. So
they would have argued they never had a voice.
Probably, but still, I mean, it just shows it in my mind, because I heard the same information as Tonda. It was supposed to be after the U.S. election. Now it postponed in December. Now I'm hearing also January. There is a lack of urgency about what Canada and the federal government, as a federal government, should do to be prepared for the arrival of Donald Trump in Washington. We're not seeing anything. And guess what Mr. Doug Ford is doing? He's filling the void by saying we should kick out Mexico out of the free trade deal. So there you go. No urgency here. That's what you get.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for this week at least. Thanks to all 3 of you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. A key figure in the so-called Freedom Convoy of 2022 has been found guilty over his role. Pat King was found guilty on 5 counts. They relate to mischief, obstructing police, and disobeying court orders relating to the Ottawa protest. King was found not guilty on 4 other charges. His lawyer says a sentencing hearing is scheduled for January 16th. Defense Minister Bill Blair says Canada's donation of a national advanced surface-to-air missile system has arrived in Ukraine. Blair says it will help Ukraine bolster its air defenses against Russian attacks. The minister reacting to yesterday's ballistic missile attack by Russia. Here he is at the Halifax International Security Forum.
The use of an ICBM by Russia against Ukraine in my opinion, is a significant and serious and concerning escalation in that conflict. And at the same time, I also recognize the actions of a bully. When a bully's victim can hit back, the bully reacts badly, as Mr. Putin is reacting badly right now.
And Ontario is the third province to reach a deal with Ottawa on funding school food programs. Ontario will receive $108 million over 3 years. The federal government says the money will help feed an additional 160,000 students and serve nearly 10 million meals a year. Last spring's budget set aside $1 billion over 5 years for school food programs across Canada. Some small businesses are warning that a 2-month break on sales tax could prove to be a headache, especially with Canada Post still on strike. With me now is Dan Kelly, President and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Dan, good to see you. Thanks again for making some time.
Good to be with you.
You posted on social media today that outside of restaurant owners, I've not heard yet from a single small retailer who is excited about the GST HST holiday or believes the benefits will outweigh the costs and uncertainty that this will bring. Tell us more about why this is the case.
Yeah, look, I think that there are many that don't know how big a job it is going to be for retailers to try to figure out on the thousands of items that they might sell, which ones are going to be tax exempt and which ones are not. And we're hearing from lots of those businesses that there's just tons of stuff in the gray area, as best as the federal government has tried to delineate which products are exempt or not. Secondly, we haven't even seen legislation yet. So business owners are also knowing about the political situation that's going on in Ottawa right now. Is this going to be implemented by the CRA without legislation? Is something going to pass before that? If you go and spend the time to reprogram all your machines, and then you find out that the legislation hasn't passed, are we going to have to switch gears again? And just the reprogramming is significant at cash registers, and then having to do it again at the end of the holiday period in mid-February. These are just a few of the things that we're hearing from small retailers that may sell mixed goods, some of which are exempt and some of which are not. So, and realizing that we only have had this announcement for a day, are you getting answers on any of this yet from the government? We've been pushing them into finance and getting some answers back, and that has been helpful. We've been able to relay that, but we're getting lots and lots of calls from business owners across the country right now. But quite apart from just the concerns in the gray area, there is also several other issues that worry business owners. Some are saying that they're worried that they're going to start to see customers return a bunch of items that they've already purchased, only to then try to repurchase them after December 14th when the GST holiday starts. Business owners are concerned about what happens after February 15th. Are they going to have a dead zone of sales upon that period? And the lead time to get this all in place at the busiest time for small businesses. The 6 weeks leading up to Christmas are make it or break it for small retailers. 25–40% of their sales often in this 6 week period. Now we're compressing it even greater with this holiday. I don't know. It's a bit of a mess. Okay, I do want to ask you then, talking about the time frame of this, the NDP has been calling simply for a permanent GST removal on certain essential items. Is that something that you and your members would be more favorable to? Look, I think the first part of what they're talking about, permanent, is the operative word here. And that's what businesses and I think consumers are looking for, is some form of permanent tax relief, not temporary tax relief that is on and off. But if we are going to make permanent tax cuts, I can give a list of examples that are better than the GST for reductions. The small business corporate tax rate, employment insurance and Canada pension plan premiums, or perhaps the 19% hike in the carbon tax that is slated for April 1st. Look, it's not gone unnoticed that the fact that we're relieving GST, the 5% or potentially the 13 or 15% HST for a couple of months period over the holidays, and then 6 weeks after the holiday ends, we're going to be increasing the cost of all of those same goods because we're seeing an increase in the carbon tax in 8 out of 10 provinces. That's significant. That's a permanent tax increase that is going to happen on those very same products and services and a whole bunch more.
All right, we have a moment left, and I want to switch gears to the Canada Post strike because your group has written the federal Labour Minister to call for either binding arbitration or a back-to-work bill if the strike continues. Tell me what has been the cost so far for your members, and really does that grow through the holiday season that we're coming into?
Yeah, we're quickly running out of holiday season to get goods to customers through Canada Post. If this lasts another week or two, I don't know. Canada Post is going to be irrelevant for the holidays because business owners won't be able to switch gears. The cost of there are private sector alternatives to Canada Post to ship goods, but they're a lot more expensive and they have capacity issues on top of the fact that they don't have the same cross-Canada rural and remote distribution that Canada Post offers. So we are without the large bedrock carrier across the country right now. No prospects of that being solved. The federal government has kind of taken a hands-off position on this whole file. Business owners are quickly giving up on Canada Post, and they're one of the last reliable customers that Canada Post has. I don't see how this helps the union, and certainly doesn't help Canada Post Corporation.
All right, Dan Kelly of the CFIB, thanks for your time on this.
Anytime.
The Halifax International Security Forum gets underway this weekend, the annual event that brings together political and defense officials from 60 countries, all focused on security and protecting democracies around the world. CPAC's Michael Serapio has been taking part in the forum since Thursday. Michael.
Well, Andrew, you're right. The Halifax International Security Forum is now underway here, really in a city that has hosted this international gathering for 16 years now. But this time around, there is a greater sense of urgency, perhaps even concern, not only because of a changing administration in the United States, but also the evolution of new technology that might mean the threats against democracy will not only come from state actors, but also non-state actors. It's something I discussed with Janice Stein, the founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, also a co-founding member of this Halifax International Security Forum. Janice, thank you for taking the time.
Pleasure to be with you, Michael.
Always good to see you. Listen, this conference is unique in that I believe it's the only one that talks about security in the context of protecting democracies around the world. Why is that conversation important in this moment in time?
It's, I think, especially important, Michael, because democracies are facing increased security challenges of all kinds, harder for democracies to meet those challenges while protecting democratic institutions. It's just harder. In some ways, autocrats have an easier time, but it's fundamentally important that democracies meet them in a democratic way, in ways that are consistent with our laws, with our norms, and with our institutions.
And when you talk about the challenges to democracies, in particular right now, what are you thinking of? What's in mind to those issues?
So if we just look a little bit ahead, Michael, and we understand the wave of technology change that is going to come at us, advanced AI, quantum computing, just in that one area, there are fundamental questions of encryption, the security of encryption, but the other side of that, privacy and rights. If you're not a democracy, you just don't worry about those things. You charge ahead. If you are a democracy, you have to balance the opportunities that these technologies will certainly provide on the battlefield with questions of rights.
On the battlefield, and when it comes to the state actors who might use those against democracies around the world, certainly Russia comes to mind, China comes to mind. Are those the two primary players that this conference is concerned about?
If you ask the majority of security experts here, there's no question that the focus would be on the pacing threat of China for the United States, but for our European colleagues, it's not China. It's actually Russia. But let me take you just somewhere a little different here. As we think about the diffusion of these technologies, there will be many smaller states and actually groups that are not states that will have access to these technologies. They diffuse. They're not as expensive, for example, as nuclear technology. So we are going to have a battlefield that is going to be much less defined by the great powers in some ways than the ones that we're very familiar with.
And I think when you talk about technology and AI, certainly we're already starting to address issues of disinformation, and the distinction being that disinformation is purposefully misleading people rather than people misunderstanding on their own.
It's not misinformation,
Yes.
it's disinformation. It is intentional. Right? It's part of a battlefield campaign.
And we're seeing that now. Even though you say non-state actors will be involved, right now we are seeing state actors involved in it.
Well, in Canada, what are the biggest sources of disinformation? Russia, Iran, India, and China. And these are all operating in Canada, in our domestic society. So how do we think about this, Michael? Is domestic society in Canada part of the new battlefield space? It actually is.
So when this forum comes together, and this is the 16th time that the Halifax International Forum has come together, really what we're talking about is trying to understand not only the current challenges to democracy, but the future challenges that are coming about. Do you think people understand the critical moment that we're in right now?
I worry that we are not taking the moment seriously enough. And the reason I do worry, Michael, is that these threats are converging and intersecting, right? So it's not only about what happens in a battlefield. It's not only about technology, which is increasingly where the big powers are competing. It's not only our economies, where we are restructuring supply chains. It's not only about a shrinking population, which is going to make military recruitment so much harder. Look what's happening both in Ukraine and in Russia. All these forces are converging at the same time. So I can't over-exaggerate the importance of this moment.
The importance of this moment. So what do you hope comes out of this conference? Because we are at this point where we are just at the beginning of the 16th annual Halifax International Security Forum. What do you hope comes out at the end of the weekend?
I'm really hoping for new partnerships. And what do I mean by that? We need private sector leaders engaged in this conversation. First of all, innovation is now happening in the private sector. And that's a big difference from what it was 30 or 40 years ago. They have to be part of this conversation in a completely different way. One of the interesting conversations we just had at a lunch, Michael, was how do we procure together? How do we develop and buy next generation technologies together so that we can do this in an efficient way and get more bang for our buck, because that really matters. We can't have that conversation without private sector leaders in. Secondly, civil society leaders have to be part of this. They need to understand the difficult trade-offs that we have between safety on the one hand and the capacity to protect ourselves on the other. It's not one or the other, it's balancing both. If they're not in the conversation, they're not going to get it. So I hope we can lay the groundwork for these kinds of partnerships.
And to that, this is why the conversations are happening here in Halifax. Janice, appreciate you walking us through it. Thank you for the time.
It's always great to be with you.
And that was Michael Serapio in conversation with Janice Stein at the Halifax International Security Forum. You will see more coverage from Halifax next week right here with Michael on Primetime Politics. For now, that's going to be all for this edition. I'm Andrew Thompson. For all of us at CPAC, thanks for watching.